In the previous video, I explored the origin of money. I also touched upon the fact that already in ancient Mesopotamia they used clay tablets as a sort of money, not because clay itself was valuable, but because it represented a promise of future payment of certain goods. Today, basically all money and financial instruments are intrinsically worthless and are only as good as the promise they bear. Banknotes would be only a piece of paper if it wasn't for the state's guarantee that you can use it universally for payment. Bonds are also worthless if the issuer defaults on the payments, thus breaking the promise that the bond represents, etc. Realizing that you can exchange goods today for a promise of payment in the future and making it formal was the first necessary step towards banking and finance. But in order to discover modern finance, Europe needed one more development. It had to import a different numeric system. As late as the 12th century, Europeans were still using Roman numerals, which were impractical for any kind of more complicated calculation. The man who introduced and popularized the Hindu-Arabic numeric system in Europe was a young Italian mathematician known as Fibonacci. Today, he is mostly known for the Fibonacci sequence named after him, but that is one of many important ideas introduced in his revolutionary book Liber Abaci, published in 1202. The most important was the introduction of Indo-Arabic numerals. He also showed how it could be used for bookkeeping, currency conversion, and crucially, calculation of interest. Venice became one of the laboratories for financial development. In the 15th century, it was a vibrant trading center reliant on overseas trade with the Islamic world. But the merchants needed cash in advance if they were to launch these voyages. This created the necessity for loans, but the overseas trade was a risky business. Many ships never made it. No moneylender would undertake such risk unless there was a profit to be made, and the profit was in form of interest. However, Christianity did not allow usury, as lending with interest was called back then. Such activity would be punished by excommunication. This is where Jews come in. Jews were expelled from Spain in 1492 and had to find new homes. The Jewish presence in Venice dates back to early 16th century. They were restricted to ghettos and banned from joining guilds or conducting retail trade. Therefore, they couldn't do much besides providing financial services, which were much needed in 16th century Venice. The Old Testament banned Jews to lend with interest to other Jews, but they could do so to strangers, that is, Christians. And so, the merchants had to go to the Jewish ghettos to receive a loan for their voyages. This is one of the important points in history where the reputation of Jews as greedy moneylenders was created. It is not a coincidence that Shakespeare's play, The Merchant of Venice, has a greedy Jew Shylock as its main character. If you like this video so far, please consider subscribing to this channel. Even before the Jews started lending money in Venice, a more formal banking was taking root in Florence. No other family influenced early banking as much as the Medicis. The word banker comes from the Italian word banco, which means a bench. The early bankers did their business on the street, literally sitting on benches with a small table. The Medici started in the same way. Before 1390s, Medicis used to be gangsters rather than bankers. Then came Giovanni Medici, who turned the family into one of the most famous families of the entire Renaissance era. He built his reputation in Rome as a currency trader. Nonetheless, he saw a greater potential in his home Florence, where he returned in 1397. Within the next 20 years, he built a bank with branches in Florence, Rome, and Venice. His son Cosimo later expanded into other Italian cities. Their business model was ingenious. Part of their operation was currency trading. Charging interest was banned, but there was no ban on making money on currency exchange. Their business was mainly brokerage of bills of exchange. This is how it worked. For example, Merchant A in Florence would sell his merchandise worth 1,000 florins to a Merchant B in London. The merchant A would draw the bill of exchange, saying that merchant B has to pay him the amount in British pounds at a specified exchange rate, let's say 20 cents for 1 florin. The bill of exchange would be due in 3 months. If the merchant did not want to wait 3 months for their money, they turned to a bank like the Medicis. The Medici Bank would buy the bill, paying the merchant A the 1,000 florins right away, sending a courier to London with the bill, and then the London branch would collect the 200 pounds from the merchant B in 3 months. In order to make profit, they had to find a reverse transaction, but at a better exchange rate. They would find a merchant C in London, selling goods to a Florentine merchant D. The London branch would buy the bill of exchange from merchant C, paying him the 200 pounds and sending a courier to Florence. However, this time the exchange rate on the bill would be 19 cents for 1 florin. So, in another 3 months, the Medici branch in Florence would now collect 1,053 florins from the merchant D. In this way, they would make a profit of more than 5% in 6 months in these few steps. The obvious catch was that they needed to ensure to make these transactions at a favorable exchange rate, but the Medicis were masters at this. In order to be able to do this on a large scale, they needed a lot of cash, so they had to attract depositors. In order to do so, they gave their large depositors so-called discretionary accounts, where they received discrezione, basically a gift for depositing their money in the bank. The name of the depositors was kept secret, hence the name discretionary. But the clients could not withdraw their money on demand. This was essentially a term account with interest in all but the name. With this system, the Medici and their clients were able to make money without committing a sin in the eyes of the church. The real strength of Medici was diversification and decentralization. Other Italian banks went bankrupt due to default of one of their large debtors. The Medici Bank, on the other hand, was a series of interlocking partnerships, to a degree independent on one another. The branch managers were not employees but partners, paid with a share of the profits. The Medici transformed their economic power into political power. Giovanni's son Cosimo became de facto king of Florence. 2 Medicis became popes, 2 queens of France, and 3 dukes of Italian city-states. We will discuss more modern banking in the next videos on the birth of bond market and stock market. If you got interested in this book, please consider buying it using the link in the description.